Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan from 1982. What's there to say about this one? Well, apparently a lot, because I'm about to do a whole gigantic video on it. But it's obviously a classic. It's one of the best sci-fi movies of all time. It's certainly up there for me. It's a movie that was a big deal when it first came out for a lot of reasons. For one, it ties in with an original series episode, Space Seed. And of course, it's also the death of Spock. Spoiler alert. And although 1982 was still a couple of years before my time, it's not hard to see how this would have been a huge deal for Star Trek fans. And this movie also is a bit of a double-edged sword, in a sense. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a great movie. I love the character development in the movie, but at the same time, it's kind of the first piece of Star Trek that was really made with mainstream audiences in mind. You know, it's a movie that is accessible for even non-Star Trek fans. And while that can be a good thing, it can also dilute what Star Trek was originally intended to be. Because modern Hollywood always looks back on great movies and they take the wrong lessons from them. They'll just say, Wrath of Khan was great, let's do that exact same thing again. And that's how you end up with movies like Star Trek Nemesis or Into Darkness. Because they don't really understand why it was successful in the first place. But this movie is a big deal, and I have a lot to say about it. I wish I didn't, but I do, so I should probably just get started. And I hope this turns out okay. I don't have a lot of confidence in my ability to talk about this movie. I don't know why, but I'm more comfortable talking about bad Star Trek movies like Nemesis or Insurrection. And this movie is obviously the polar opposite of that. So, I guess we'll just see how it goes. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, directed by Nicholas Meyer, starring William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, Ricardo Montalban, Kirstie Alley, and of course, the main cast of Star Trek the original series. The movie opens up in the 23rd century, because why wouldn't it? On what seems to be the Enterprise, a Vulcan named Lieutenant Saavik is introduced. She's apparently in command, and they are approaching the Klingon neutral zone. And I have no idea why the display shows the neutral zone as just a little red sphere. Like, why is the neutral zone just a 7th grade gym class kickball right now? Who knows? But they get a distress call from the Kobayashi Maru, a transport freighter in need of assistance, but they're on the other side of the neutral zone. Saavik reluctantly orders Sulu to plot an intercept course. And once they do, 3 Klingon vessels show up and attack them. There's explosions all over the bridge. Standard starship design flaw, of course, as we know. And the entire crew seems to be dead, except for Saavik, who gives the final order to abandon ship. Then the bridge opens up, and Admiral Kirk heroically walks in. The whole thing was a training simulation, obviously. I mean, anyone who knows Star Trek knows the Kobayashi Maru at this point. It's iconic. And Kirk inspects the mayhem that just took place. He looks at McCoy, who is playing dead, and he says this.
Physician, heal thyself.
Is that all you gotta say? What about my performance?
I'm not a drama critic.
So that's kind of funny, and Kirk's delivery is pretty great. It's like he's firing back at the people who criticize his acting ability. And Saavik remains behind to talk to Kirk. She says she doesn't believe this was a fair test of her command abilities because there was no way to win. And Kirk says a no-win scenario is a possibility that every commander may face. He also says how we deal with death is at least as important as how we deal with life. I feel like I could spend a whole video on just the Kobayashi Maru, but we will come back to it later because it does come up a number of times. And at this point in time, the Enterprise is under the command of Captain Spock, and the ship is about to set out for a 3-week training voyage. The crew will consist of mostly cadets preparing for graduation from the academy, which is kind of crazy that the Enterprise is being used for this. But keep in mind, despite the recent refit, it's a pretty old ship. It's been around for at least 25 years at this point, so maybe it makes sense that it has been put out to pasture and relegated to training cadets. And Spock talks to Kirk. He's interested in hearing how Kirk would grade the trainees, and Kirk says they destroyed the simulator room with you in it. Spock says the Kobayashi Maru frequently wreaks havoc with students, and he recalls that Kirk took the test 3 times himself, and his final solution was unique. It also happens to be Kirk's birthday, and Spock presents him with a gift, a copy of A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. And Kirk reads from it. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Spock wishes Kirk a happy birthday, and he says, surely the best of times. But it isn't. Kirk is depressed. He returns to his home in San Francisco, and it's an interesting home. I mean, he's got, like, flintlock pistols on his wall, and some of them are mounted upside down. Okay, that's a choice, I guess. I mean, I thought Sulu was the one who liked collecting ancient firearms, but I guess Kirk does too. And Kirk mopes around a bit until McCoy shows up. He wishes him a happy birthday, and he gives him some very retro reading glasses because he's allergic to the medication he would need to take as the alternative. He also gives Kirk a bottle of Romulan ale, which is supposed to be illegal, but McCoy says he only uses it for medicinal purposes. So McCoy is just going around recommending that his patients get absolutely shithoused. So that's nice. And Kirk takes a drink of it, and it looks like it tastes absolutely horrible. What a great birthday gift. And McCoy can tell that Kirk is in a bit of a mood, so he does some digging to find out what his problem is. But Kirk shields her up, and he doesn't really want to talk about it. But even without telling him, McCoy can see what the problem is. Kirk is getting older. He feels like he's lost his sense of purpose. He tells Kirk to get back his command before he really does grow old. And then it jumps over to the Starship Reliant. The first officer is Chekhov. And he's in the middle of searching for a lifeless planet so they can use it as a test site for a scientific project called Genesis. I wouldn't think it would be that hard to find a completely lifeless planet, but the Reliant seems to be struggling. They come across a planet that they think is Ceti Alpha 6. It's mostly lifeless, but they do detect a minor life form on the surface. Chekhov thinks it could be nothing more than a particle of preanimate matter caught in the Matrix. Not that Matrix. I don't know what Matrix he means, but he says Matrix. And they're going to investigate just to be sure. He informs the scientific team located at a research station called Regula 1, and this is where we get introduced to Dr. Carol Marcus and her son David. They are the lead scientists of the Genesis project, and they insist they need a completely lifeless planet, not even so much as a microbe. Now, you'd think that since the scans did detect something, they would just move on and look for another planet. But if they did that, we wouldn't have a movie. So Chekhov and his captain, Captain Tyrell, are beaming down to check it out. And it's a barren and inhospitable world. It's hard to believe that anything is alive here. But they come across some cargo containers. They go inside. Clearly, people have been living here. Tyrell spots a glass container with something moving under the sand within it. He asks, what the hell is that? I don't know, man. Don't you have a tricorder? How about you use it? And Chekhov sees something that says Botany Bay on it, and he starts to panic. He tells Tyrell that they have to get out of there. But when they get outside, they're surrounded by a group of people. They take them inside, and Khan is revealed. Chekhov recognizes him, and Khan recognizes Chekhov, which, of course, is probably the most famous inconsistency of this movie, because Chekhov didn't make his Star Trek debut until season 2 of the original series. And Khan's episode was towards the end of season 1, so they never had any scenes together. But it could simply be explained that Chekhov was on the Enterprise at the time, and he just had a lesser role and didn't serve on the bridge until season 2. I think that makes the most sense. And I love how Ricardo Montalban says things in this movie. Like, he delivers certain lines in what I can only describe as a sinister whisper. Mr. Chekhov, I never forget a phase. And Khan explains that he and his people were marooned here 15 years ago by James Kirk. He also tells Tyrell that there's no use pleading with any of them because they've all sworn to live and die at his command. Tyrell says he's never even met Admiral Kirk. And that is a mistake because Khan is shocked and almost enraged that Kirk has been promoted to Admiral. It's not hard to understand why. As far as Khan is concerned, this means that Kirk has actually been rewarded for imprisoning him on this planet. And Chekhov speaks up, and he calls Khan a liar. He says that on Ceti Alpha 5 there was life, a fair chance. And Khan says this is Ceti Alpha 5, very dramatically. He says that Ceti Alpha 6 exploded 6 months after they were left here, and the shockwave laid waste to Ceti Alpha 5. I mean, do planets just do that? Do they just explode for no fucking reason? I mean, did the Death Star do a drive-by? What the hell's going on here? It seems like a bit of a stretch. And when the Reliant entered this system, did they not realize that there's one less planet than there should be? What can I say? I have a lot of questions. And Khan demands to know why they're here. And he lifts up Chekhov by this very convenient handle that is just on the front of his spacesuit. And he reasons that they just didn't expect to find him, that they thought this was Ceti Alpha 6. He then shows them the creature that was under the sand in the glass that was moving around. And Khan describes it as Ceti Alpha 5's only remaining indigenous life form, which is, it seems unlikely. How does it survive? What does it eat? For that matter, what do Khan and his people eat? Is there water? How did they survive the devastation of this entire ecosystem in these tin can cargo containers? Who knows? And how the hell did Reliant's initial scans detect these bugs, but not Khan and his people? I suppose we have to chalk it up to Khan's genetically enhanced brain. But then again, there is an episode of Next Generation where a genetically enhanced individual can't be detected by scans, somehow. So maybe I just answered my own question. Either way, I'm getting sidetracked, as usual. And Khan pulls some kind of larva from the creature, and he says they killed 20 of his people, including his beloved wife, which we can safely assume is Lieutenant MacGyver's from Space Seed. He says their young entered through the ear and wrap themselves around the cerebral cortex. It makes the victim susceptible to suggestion before driving them insane and eventually killing them. How nice. And he puts the creatures in their helmets and he puts them on their heads. They crawl into their ears in what is, at this point at least, a very horrifying scene for Star Trek. I mean, nobody had seen anything like this in Star Trek up to this point. It's pretty disturbing. And off screen, Khan ends up taking control of the Reliant and leaving the crew on Ceti Alpha 5. And Kirk, McCoy, Sulu, and Uhura arrive on the Enterprise to oversee the training voyage. Kirk reluctantly conducts an inspection. It's part of his job, but it's pretty clear he has no desire to judge how Spock trains his crew. He knows it's going to be pretty much perfection. But he goes through the motions anyway. And after doing the bare minimum, they're ready to get underway. There's a brief scene where Saavik tells Spock that Kirk is not what she expected. She says he's so human. And Spock says nobody's perfect. Which is pretty funny, but also kind of bizarre, because she had a full-on conversation with Kirk just yesterday. So why is she acting like she's just seeing him for the first time? And it seems kind of illogical to say that a human is so human. He is human, you wacko. And this is also, I believe it's the first and only time we see Vulcan spoken as a language. So that's somewhat interesting, I suppose. Anyway, they're cleared for departure, and Spock asks Saavik to pilot the Enterprise out of space dock, even though she doesn't pilot it. She just sits in the captain's chair and gives the order to depart. The whole thing makes Kirk very nervous for some reason. I mean, this seems like something a lieutenant should be able to do. It's not exactly the Kobayashi Maru, but they're acting as though there's some sort of danger here. And even if she sucks at giving the orders, Sulu is at the helm. It's not like he's going to do anything to crash the ship. In any case, Chekhov, now with the worm in his brain, has obviously spilled the beans about Project Genesis to Khan. So Khan makes Chekhov send a message to the Regular One space station informing them that the Reliant will be coming by to collect all data and materials related to Genesis. Carol and David strongly protest, and this guy over here is clearly posing in a way to make his biceps look larger than they really are. So that's great. Maybe he will scare Chekhov off. It's worth a shot. But Chekhov says he has his orders. So it obviously didn't work. And David asks who gave the order. Chekhov says the order comes from Admiral James T. Kirk. So naturally, Carol Marcus tries to contact Kirk. And this is where it's revealed that Kirk and Carol have a history together, although no details are given yet. It's a very staticky communication. It's pretty clear that they're being jammed. But before it cuts out, Carol says someone is taking Genesis. And they can't get in touch with Reliant, so the Enterprise is ordered to investigate Regular One. Because, you guessed it, they're the only ship in range. Tragic. But at least in this case, it's somewhat plausible, since the problem isn't at or near Earth. So they're heading there. And Kirk talks to Spock, and Spock basically relinquishes command to Kirk without Kirk even asking. Kirk says it won't be necessary, but Spock says he has no ego to bruise. And he goes on to say that it was a mistake for Kirk to accept promotion. Commanding a starship is his first best destiny. Anything else is a waste of material. And Kirk responds with this.
I would not presume to debate you.
That is wise. In any case, were I to invoke logic, logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Or the one.
It's a great exchange between these two guys. It really showcases the bond that they have. Kirk is really one of the only people that can make Spock say something that is not quite logical. He will openly admit that he is Kirk's friend and always will be. He doesn't do that for many people. And as we know, Kirk is feeling old. He's feeling purposeless. And it's been a while since he's been in command, so he's probably lacking in confidence. And Spock, despite having embraced the Vulcan philosophy, can see that. He basically says, don't worry about it. I've got your back. Just like old times. It's great stuff. So Kirk takes command, and they're on course for Regula. And it is, of course, going to be a trap set by Khan. Khan's right-hand man tries to convince Khan that he's already beaten Kirk, and he doesn't need to beat him again. And Khan says this.
He tasks me. He tasks me, and I shall have him. I'll chase him round the moons of Nibia and round the Antares maelstrom and round perdition's flames before I give him up.
And if that quote seems somewhat overdramatic, it's because it's kind of heavily inspired by a quote from Captain Ahab in Moby Dick. It's not a direct quote, but it's very similar to something Ahab says. There's also a copy of Moby Dick on the shelf in the cargo containers on Ceti Alpha 5. And I always found that kind of funny. Like, here's this genetically enhanced, super intelligent dude, and he's read Moby Dick, and he's apparently learned nothing from it. kind of tragic. In any case, while the Enterprise heads towards Regula, Kirk takes the opportunity to show Spock and McCoy, and the audience for that matter, what exactly Genesis is. He shows them a top-secret recording from Carol Marcus explaining Project Genesis. And it's basically a process where molecules are reorganized into life-generating matter. And this is done on a planetary scale. Basically, they launch the Genesis torpedo at a lifeless planet, and it will turn it into a planet full of life. And this is very early CGI, by the way, and I think it looks pretty cool. And Spock points out that if this were used on a planet that had life already, it would destroy it in favor of its new matrix. And this is incredible. The more you think about it, the more it feels a little too fantastic, at least in my opinion. It's a little hard to fathom. And I like to imagine that the Genesis program was kind of the basis for the replicator technology that you see in the Next Generation era. It's basically the same principle. And McCoy seems to be the only one freaking out about this, even though he's absolutely right to do so. Everyone should be freaking out about this. But Spock tells him that he must learn to govern his passions. And on their approach, they encounter the Reliant. They hail them, but there's no response. Savick quotes a regulation about approaching a ship when communications haven't been established, but Kirk can't believe that could apply to another Federation starship. But he does order that they go to yellow alert. But then the Reliant's shields go up, they lock phasers and fire on the Enterprise. It's a direct hit, and the Enterprise is in rough shape. They have to go to auxiliary power. But that gets taken out with a second direct hit. And they get a signal from the Reliant ordering them to surrender. And Kirk tells Uhura to signal their surrender. There's no other option. Khan appears on screen, which of course shocks Kirk. He tells him that he means to avenge himself upon him. Kirk tells Khan he'll beam aboard the Reliant if he'll spare the Enterprise crew. Khan agrees to this if the Enterprise transmits all data regarding Project Genesis. Kirk asks for some time to retrieve the information, and Khan gives him 60 seconds. They use that time to look up the Reliant's command codes. This will allow them to order the Reliant to lower its shields. Everything's all set. Khan thinks he's about to get a Project Genesis PDF file, but what he's actually going to get is a couple of phaser shots to the dick, so to speak. And with Reliant shields down, they take some heavy damage from the Enterprise and have to retreat. It worked. And Sulu says, "You did it, sir." And Kirk says, "I did nothing, except get caught with my britches down." He's embarrassed and ashamed that he didn't see this coming. And you know, for everyone who foolishly thinks that Kirk is an arrogant, ego-driven jerk, how can you possibly think that after watching this movie? He is vulnerable, he makes mistakes, and he's overly hard on himself when he does. I just think this movie is a great character showcase for James T. Kirk. And Kirk wants to assess the damage. He heads towards the turbolift, and Scotty emerges, and he's carrying a badly injured crewman in his arms. Now, why on earth would Scotty bring him to the bridge? I have no idea. I mean, maybe the turbolift is even damaged. Who knows? And they finally end up in sickbay. The young crewman ends up dying, and Scotty is very upset about it. And the reason he's upset is because this character is actually Scotty's nephew. Earlier in the movie, he refers to him as my sister's youngest admiral. And there's a little bit more detail about that in the director's cut, I believe. But if you missed that very brief line earlier in the movie, it makes for a somewhat confusing relationship. Either way, he dies. Tragic. And the Enterprise limps closer to the Regular One space station. They hail them, but there's no response. And Spock describes the planet Regula as nothing more than a great rock in space, which honestly makes me wonder why it wasn't used to test the Genesis device. As we'll soon see, they did partially use it to create life underground on Regula, but why not use it on the whole planet? Why did they need Reliant to go looking for one? Who knows? In any case, Kirk, McCoy, and Lieutenant Savick beam aboard the space station. And Kirk is wearing a jacket that has an absolutely insane collar. I mean, look at this thing. If he zipped this jacket all the way up, his face would turn into a foreskin. But for now, he's leaving it in Dilophosaurus mode, so that's nice. Although unlike McCoy and Savick, Kirk's collar is popped, so he's like proud of it. It's kind of hilarious to me. But what's not hilarious is that they find dead bodies everywhere. There is a genuine horror movie jump scare when McCoy discovers the first body hanging upside down. Khan was obviously here. They also find Chekhov and Captain Tyrrell stuffed inside of a cupboard. Tragic. And they are alive, and Chekhov explains the situation. He tells Kirk that Khan put creatures in their ears to control their minds. He says Khan thought he controlled them, but he didn't. And Captain Tyrrell says that Khan was furious that he couldn't find the Genesis device. He went wild and slit everyone's throats. He left abruptly because he had to get back to the Reliance so he could set the trap for Kirk. And they take a look around at the transporter room, and they see that the last people to use it beamed directly into Regula's core, or not into its core, but deep underground. Kirk recalls Carol talking about how Stage 2 of the Genesis project was going to be underground, so he thinks that these coordinates might be where they hid Genesis. He gets a status update from Spock, and he tells Kirk that if they do things by the book, hours would seem like days. They won't have main power for 6 days, but restoration may be possible in 2 days. So, on paper, that seems pretty grim. Spock says they can't even beam them back, which is definitely inconvenient because I would want to at least send Tyrrell and Chekhov up to the Enterprise, given what they've been through and the fact that Chekhov has admitted that Khan put mind control creatures in their heads. I think that it would be a wise precaution, but that's obviously not on the table. And Kirk orders Spock to restore whatever power he can and take the Enterprise to the nearest starbase. And of course, Khan is on board the Reliant, listening to this entire conversation. So they decide to beam down to the coordinates on the transporter. They materialize in a bunker deep underground, and they see the Genesis device, and David Marcus shows up, and he tries to stab Admiral Kirk. He thinks Kirk killed everyone on the space station, which is a bold assumption for a scientist. But of course, David is Kirk's son, and he's obviously got some deep-seated resentment towards his father. He even calls Kirk a son of a bitch. Come on, kid. Leave poor Grandma out of this, please. Thankfully, Carol shows up and things settle down, at least for a brief moment. But Tyrrell and Chekhov pull phasers on the rest of the party. Tyrrell contacts Khan and asks if he's been listening. And he also transmits the coordinates so they can beam up the Genesis device. Then Khan orders Tyrrell to kill Admiral Kirk. And Tyrrell somehow resists this order. He won't do it. I mean, he shot one of the scientists a minute ago and vaporized him, but for some reason, he refuses to kill Kirk, a man who he has admitted that he doesn't even know. And the bug in his brain is trying to force him to do it, but he turns the phaser on himself and dies. Tragic. It's a very bizarre death, but heroic. But what's more bizarre is that Chekhov passes out and the bug crawls out of his ear. Kirk shoots it with his phaser, and you'd think Chekhov would be dead, but apparently not. He's just a bit sleepy. And Kirk picks up the communicator and rages at Khan. And Khan is shocked that his, quote, old friend is still alive. Khan then beams up the Genesis device, and Kirk says, "You've got Genesis, but you don't have me." He says, "You'll have to come down here to kill me," which isn't really true. I mean, he could probably just beam him up, but Khan says that he's done far worse than kill him. He's hurt him, and he wishes to go on hurting him. And he continues with this.
I shall leave you as you left me, as you left her, marooned for all eternity. center of a dead planet. Buried alive. Buried alive.
So there's the famous Khan scream from Kirk. It's very over the top, but I think it's great. It's been parodied and it's been mocked, but I think it really highlights the now mutual hate that these two guys have for each other. I also think it's Kirk playing Khan a bit, because as we'll soon see, he wants Khan to think that he's won. Kirk is doing a rope-a-dope, and weirdly, Kirk's scream seems to give Khan an orgasm. So, congratulations. And they try to contact the Enterprise, but they get no response. McCoy assumes that they're either limping towards the nearest starbase, as ordered, or they've been destroyed. So it appears they're stranded. And I don't know what is going on with these clunky-ass communicators in this movie. I can't say I'm a fan of that. Compared to the original series communicators, these things look a little ridiculous. But moving on. Kirk says he's hungry, and Carol says there's food in the Genesis cave. So David takes Saavik and McCoy to have a look at it, while Kirk and Carol remain behind. They talk, and Kirk says, "I did what you asked. I stayed away." And he asks why she didn't tell David. And she says, "How can you ask me that? Were we together? Were we going to be? You had your world and I had mine. And I wanted him in mine, not chasing through the universe with his father." So it's pretty clear that neither one of them were willing to give up their careers to raise a family. And she goes on to say that David is a lot like Kirk in many ways. And she asks him to tell her what he's feeling. And Kirk says this.
There's a man out there I haven't seen in 15 years who's trying to kill me. You show me a son, I'd be happy to help him. My son. My life that could have been. It wasn't. What am I feeling? Old. Worn out.
So Kirk is really going through it. He has a lot of regrets right now. He's probably thinking that he should have just left Starfleet and stayed with Carol and David. And he never would have encountered Khan, and his own son wouldn't despise him. Of course, what he's not thinking about is that the Enterprise crew and Earth itself would have been destroyed a dozen times over if that's the path he chose. And Carol says, "Let me show you something that will make you feel young." And she says it with such sympathy for Kirk. I think it's pretty clear that she did love him at one point. She just didn't love his career. And this whole scene seems like they're in private, but Chekhov can be seen laying down in the corner, and I think we're supposed to believe he's unconscious, but he is holding some kind of ice pack against his ear. So he's probably at least partially aware of this very personal conversation between Kirk and Carol. He's just, sitting there while mommy and daddy are fighting. I think that's kind of funny. But in any case, they take a look at the Genesis cave, and it's a whole ecosystem. There's plant life and even a waterfall, so it's pretty clear that Genesis works, at least on a small scale. And they settle in, they have some food, and Saavik asks Kirk a question about the Kobayashi Maru. Obviously, she's been thinking about it since she took the test. She knows that Kirk beat the no-win scenario, but she wants to know how. And Kirk just says he reprogrammed the simulator so that it was possible to rescue the ship. David says he cheated. Kirk says he changed the conditions of the test. He also got a commendation for original thinking. And he says, "I don't like to lose." And that's why he is who he is. And in his mind, the fact that he was able to beat the test proves that there's no such thing as no-win scenarios. Like, if it really was a no-win scenario, he shouldn't have even been able to cheat at it. But in retrospect, it was a little hypocritical of him to tell Saavik that a no-win scenario is a possibility that every commander may face when he doesn't even believe that. So it's like he was teaching a student something that he doesn't really believe, which I guess does happen, but I suppose it just shows how much Kirk was going through the motions at the start of the movie. Kirk then takes out his communicator and contacts Spock. He says, "It's been 2 hours. Are you ready?" And Spock responds, "They're ready to beam them aboard." So the discussion about how it would take days to restore power was all for Khan's benefit because they knew he'd be listening in, even though the code they were using seemed very obvious, and I'm a little surprised Khan didn't pick up on it, but whatever. 2 days meant 2 hours, and I guess he didn't tell this to the group because he wanted it to be a surprise. I don't know. They beam on board. The ship is functional, but not anywhere near ready for a straight fight. So they decide to head towards a nearby nebula where shields will be non-functional and visibility will be minimal. They pull away from Regula and Reliant sees them and follows them, but they slow down when they realize they're heading towards the nebula. After all, it's not as if Kirk is on the Enterprise, so why would Khan care that much about destroying it? But then Khan gets a hail from the Enterprise, and it's Kirk. He taunts Khan a bit, and that's all it takes. Khan orders full power and takes the ship into the nebula. Eventually, there's a phaser exchange, and Reliant takes some damage. Khan's right-hand man is killed, and Khan vows to avenge him, once again, not knowing when to quit. And Chekhov shows up on the Enterprise bridge. He seems mostly recovered from his brain bug experience, and he takes over the weapons console, which is kind of nice. Chekhov is going to get the chance to get back at Khan just by pushing a few buttons. And Spock talks to Kirk. He says that Khan is intelligent but not experienced. His decisions indicate two-dimensional thinking, which I think is putting it mildly. And there's some cool exteriors of both ships. It's actually stunning how good this looks. This is 1982, and the budget for this movie was a fraction of what they had for the motion picture, and it looks incredible. And after a few minutes of searching, the Enterprise gets the drop on the Reliant. They can barely see, but they fire and cripple the Reliant once and for all. They send a hail to the Reliant and tell them to prepare to be boarded. And I've got to wonder if the transporters even work in this mystical nebula that they're in. But it's not going to be a factor because a badly injured Khan manages to power up the Genesis device. It's on a build-up to detonation. And the Enterprise detects this. Kirk wants to beam aboard to stop it, but David says you can't. I mean, really? There's no off button? That is a major design flaw. I mean, what a disaster. And Kirk tells Scotty that they need warp speed in 3 minutes or they're all dead. But there's no response from engineering. Spock leaves the bridge, and Kirk doesn't even notice. He heads to engineering, and he sees McCoy attending to Scotty, who has collapsed from some sort of radiation exposure. The warp drive is damaged, and a section of engineering is quarantined due to a radiation leak. The only way to repair it in the time allowed is to enter it and do it manually. McCoy tries to stop Spock, but he gives him the Vulcan neck pinch, and he briefly mind melds with the unconscious McCoy and says, "Remember." He enters the chamber, and you'd think that he could at least put on some kind of protective hazmat suit that might potentially protect him, but he doesn't. He enters this miniature Chernobyl power plant with no protection other than a pair of gloves. He seals it off and begins repairing the warp drive. Scotty is awake now and seems fine, as does McCoy. They're pleading with Spock to get out of there, but he ignores them and continues his duty. And on the bridge, I love how Kirk is sitting. That is a clenched asshole posture if there ever was one. And on the Reliant, Khan is quoting some more Moby Dick. He says, "From hell's heart I stab at thee. For hate's sake I spit my last breath at thee." So, once again, he's obviously very familiar with Captain Ahab, but he hasn't learned anything from that story. Or he does know the moral of the story and he simply doesn't agree with it. Either way, it's a very similar situation to Picard in First Contact. But in Picard's case, he changes his ways once he realizes he was morphing into Captain Ahab, whereas Khan seems to be fully aware of it, and he's embracing it. Man, don't you love Star Trek? It's the best. And a bridge officer says that the warp drive is back online, and Kirk says, "Bless you, Scotty," and they go to warp just before the Genesis device explodes. And it's a massive explosion. And it seems to be causing a colorful distortion in the fabric of space itself. Carol shows up on the bridge, and she's wearing Kirk's absurd collared jacket. No idea where she was this whole time, but I guess she must be a bit chilly on the Enterprise. And Kirk gets a message from McCoy, and he sounds very shaken up. He tells Kirk to get down to engineering, and he tells him to hurry. Kirk rushes down there and tries to enter the irradiated section, but Scotty and McCoy hold him back. Kirk says he'll die, and Scotty says he's dead already. Obviously not literally, but there's nothing that can be done for him at this point. Spock slowly approaches the glass, and he even bumps into it. The radiation has blinded him. He asks Kirk if they're out of danger. Kirk says yes. Spock says, "Don't grieve, Admiral. It is logical. The needs of the many outweigh," and he trails off. And Kirk finishes it for him by saying, "the needs of the few." And Spock says, "or the one," just as Kirk said earlier. And he goes on to say that he never took the Kobayashi Maru test, and he asks Kirk what he thinks of his solution, which is almost like a joke coming from Spock. And obviously Kirk has no response. And Spock says the famous line, "I have been and always shall be your friend. Live long and prosper." It's a gut punch. Spock has died. And I don't know about you, but I think this scene hits just a little harder ever since Leonard Nimoy's passing back in 2015. It's one of the saddest scenes in Star Trek. He's just lost his best friend, a brother. And I say tragic a lot, and I say it kind of jokingly, but this really is tragic. And they have a makeshift funeral for Spock. They place his body in a hollowed-out photon torpedo, and Kirk delivers the eulogy. I'm not going to go through every line he says here. I've already quoted this movie too much as it is. But he does finish it off by saying that of all the souls he's encountered in his travels, his was the most human, which is just great. And it's kind of funny because if Spock was alive, he would say that's an insult. But we all know that it's the ultimate praise. And once again, William Shatner does a great job here. And they lower the torpedo into the bay as Scotty plays Amazing Grace on the bagpipes. Saavik can be seen crying, and we're going to have to talk about Saavik because there's a reason for why she's crying in this scene, but I don't really believe it's a good reason. But we'll come back to that in a second. They fire the torpedo, and it heads towards the new Genesis planet. And I don't really understand what this planet is. I mean, was there a lifeless planet inside the nebula? Where'd this planet come from is basically what I'm asking. Is it the regular planet? I guess it must be. But then it makes me wonder even more why they needed SETI Alpha 6. Who knows? It doesn't matter. Kirk settles into his quarters, and he tries to have a look at the book that Spock gifted him, but he can't because the glasses McCoy gifted him are broken. Definitely some symbolism there. And David comes to see him. They have a one-on-one chat for really the first time. And David says Saavik was right. You never have faced death. And Kirk says, no, not like this. I've cheated death. I've tricked my way out of death and patted myself on the back for my ingenuity. He says, I know nothing. And David says, you knew enough to tell Saavik how we face death is at least as important as how we face life. I don't know how he knows that he said that to Saavik, though, because that happened at the very beginning of the movie, and David obviously wasn't there. Whatever. Maybe she just told David that's what he said. And it's kind of odd to me because Kirk actually has faced death like this. Maybe he hasn't lost someone as close to him as Spock, but he has lost Edith Keeler, for instance. I mean, that was the same sort of no-win scenario. He's also lost a brother who we never saw alive, but William Shatner played his corpse and just wore a mustache, as weird as that is. So I don't know. I just feel like Kirk has had losses similar to this in the past, but he's just not thinking about them right now because this one hits the hardest, especially since, unlike those other instances, he's probably blaming himself for this one. And the conversation ends with David saying that he's very proud to be Kirk's son, and they hug for the first time. It's a nice scene. I'm not totally sure if David would get over his resentment so quickly, but maybe given Spock's death, it's better to give his dad a second chance. And they all gather on the bridge, and they head for SETI Alpha 5 to pick up the crew of the Reliant. Hopefully they haven't all been devoured by brain bugs. And McCoy says he's really not dead as long as we remember him, which is actually kind of ominous, all things considered. And Kirk quotes a line from A Tale of Two Cities, which is very reflective of Spock's sacrifice. And McCoy asks Kirk how he feels. And Kirk smiles and says he feels young. And before the movie ends, we see Spock's casket landed safely on the Genesis planet. How that happened, I'll never know, but we can all be glad that it did because it lets the next movie happen. So that's nice. And the movie ends with Spock delivering the space, the final frontier monologue. Brilliant movie. I always loved it. I think I've grown to appreciate it even more as I've gotten older. You know, I'm 40 now, and it's not hard to feel a little bit like Kirk does in this movie from time to time. And I think this movie did a lot for Kirk as a character. It humanizes him even further, and it makes him relatable. And as great as Kirk is as a character, he's not always the most relatable guy. But in this movie, I think he is. And Khan is shown to be the same kind of cautionary character as his idol, Captain Ahab. If he could have just learned to let things go, or at the very least learned to not let his anger get the best of him, he could have easily won. Ultimately, Khan is the one who defeats Khan. And that basically happens because he's gone insane. He's so insane in this movie. And Ricardo Montalban steals the show. He is such a charismatic actor. Every scene with him is great. And he's such a great nemesis for Kirk. They're kind of like two sides of the same coin. They're both ambitious and obsessed, but Kirk's ambition and obsession is more benign and understandable, and much more human than Khan's. And I think if this movie has one major flaw, it's that Kirk and Khan don't actually share any scenes together. It's all through ship-to-ship communications. And seeing them in the same room again would have been cool, but ultimately it's not really necessary. And as I said, Spock's sacrifice hits pretty hard. Obviously they bring him back for the next movie, but that sort of thing is commonplace now, but it wasn't in 1982. The ending of this movie was upsetting to a lot of Star Trek fans who had to wait 2 years for the next movie. And they didn't know if Spock was even going to be in it, at least not until the title was announced. So it's not like they had the instant gratification that you'd get from doing a marathon today. And I mentioned Savik's emotions earlier, and I kind of want to talk about that a little more. She was originally written to be a half Romulan character. And that sort of explains why she's a little bit more emotional than your average Vulcan. But not really, since she has chosen the Vulcan way of life, and most Romulans are pretty stoic anyway. So I don't know. I just can't really see a reason for her crying at Spock's funeral. It's just kind of odd to me. And I just don't even like the idea of her being a half Romulan because thanks to an episode of The Next Generation, The Drumhead, great episode, it's kind of a contradiction because there is a character in that who was 1/4 Romulan, and he felt the need to hide that just to even be in Starfleet. So I don't know. I think ultimately Kirstie Alley does a fine job, but I actually like Robin Curtis as Savik more in the next movie. I think her portrayal is much better in terms of being a Vulcan. I know I'm probably in the minority on that, but it is what it is. And I'll obviously talk more about that movie when we get there. And you know, I've unfortunately encountered a few people in the murky waters of social media over the years who think this movie is a little bit pretentious because of all the references to classic literature. And I don't understand how a Star Trek fan could think that. Because when someone says that, they're saying that Star Trek isn't worthy of the things it's making reference to. It's like saying Star Trek is schlock, so it's pretentious for it to make references to the classics. I don't know. I hope I'm making some sense here, but it's just a mentality I don't really understand, especially from coming from Star Trek fans. To me, it's a great movie, and combined with the next two, it really makes for a very cool Star Trek trilogy. But I should probably wrap this up. I hope this video was halfway decent. I really can't tell. I never have much confidence in discussing a movie that is this good because I feel like all I'm really saying is, hey, this is a good movie, and I'm not really adding all that much. But I'm committed to doing all the Star Trek movies, so I had to get through this one. But that is about all I've got for now. Let me know what you think of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and until next time, take it easy.
Buried alive. Buried alive.